Today on Locked On Dolphins, we're stacking the draft board for the Dolphins pick at number 48 and introducing a hierarchy of preferred fits for the team.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting, author of Touchdown Miami on Substack, the NFL draft lead for the 33rd team. I want to give a special welcome and shout out to our everydayers because it is your team every day. We don't just say it, we live it here on the Locked On Network. Today on the show, we spent most of last week and part of this week going into potential targets for the Dolphins at pick number 48, deep diving a number of players at primary needs that the Dolphins have, with a full acknowledgement that sometimes you get into a draft scenario and just authentically picking for a need isn't the way that the board falls for you. We, after doing that at pick 13, stacked the draft board. We went over it. We looked at our options, said, here's our list of our top 16 players that had first-round grades. 3 of them have either medical or off-the-field flags. That's going to eliminate them. Like, we wouldn't pick them at 13. You're guaranteed at least one of these players would kind of be my pecking order on that list. A little bit more difficult down at 48 because you don't know who's going to be gone, right? It's a little different when you're starting at 1 because the list just drops down from there. And you say, okay, start at 1, work your way to 13. That and up is your short list of like how I would target. But as you get deeper into this draft, it becomes more challenging because like I do my grades for the 33rd team, and then I put values and traits that are weighted to give an adjusted grade for how I grade for the Dolphins. And I see guys that have second-round grades for the league that have first-round grades for the Dolphins. And I see second-round guys for the Dolphins that have fourth-round grades for the league and vice versa. So once you put the scheme filters on, it really is surprising to see on a universal draft board, a player might be 25th overall. And on one team's scheme-specific set of rankings that's weighted, they might be higher. They might be 20th. And then for the Dolphins, they might be 60th. So that's where, as the draft unfolds, it becomes much more about how effectively can you identify your pillars of identity, what you need for players at the position. And then you get into the human element of it, players being right fits and all that kind of stuff. But it's a little bit more challenging working for pick 48. So what we'll do is I'm going to take the end of my late 1, early 2 bucket, and then all of my second round grades through the Dolphins specific lens. And that ends up being what I have through my late 1, early 2s and my first round grades. It's 34 players. And then once you add the second round players, I have 63 players total. So I have, in a perfect world, I'd have probably 7-8 more slots for the late 1, early 2s to kind of fill out the rest of the early second round. But you almost have a 1-for-1 relationship with total number of second round grades or better versus second round picks and first round picks that you have when it's all said and done. So Miami's in a good spot to be guaranteed to get appropriate value for their pick at 48 because they're probably going to be outside the strike zone of those players that have late 1, early 2s where you'd get surplus value if one of those players was out there, or maybe a guy with a first-round grade falls because of a medical question like a Savon Revel. And if that's the case, you probably take that cat. You don't look back, right? Like that becomes surplus value. And at that point in the draft, the risk is worth the reward for a player that I think is a really good schematic fit for what the Dolphins want to do. So I actually do have, if you're watching on YouTube, and if not, no worries, we're going to talk through the whole thing. But I want to talk about the players that landed between the bottom tier of the late 1, early 2s. So it's going to be players 30 through 64 on my draft board. I'm just going to read them by position. There is a visual element that's helpful if you're watching on YouTube. And if not, we'll talk about the tiers and how they separate throughout the course of the show as well. There are no quarterbacks in this bucket. Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders, the only 2 quarterbacks that rank in the top 64 for me. That's my personal preference. I know Jackson Dart is a red hot name. Predictably speaking, will probably go. That'll make another player available for the Dolphins, kind of push everybody down an extra slot, and not mad about that. And then Jalen Milroe got invited to the draft. So there seems to be some kind of expectation that Milroe's going to go relatively early as well. So scenarios like that, where those players, when grading for the Dolphins in their current scheme, they don't rank highly, but they end up going. All of that helps you be in a position to potentially land a surplus value type of player if you're Miami at pick number 48. Do have two running backs in this group. Of course, Ashton Genty is in the tier above. He's been omitted because I think it's a long shot he gets to 13, let alone to 48. So he's not a part of the conversation here today. So this is players ranked 30 to 64 on my personal Dolphins board. The two Ohio State backs, Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins, are the two that get the shout out here. It's kind of where the meat of wide receivers falls for me. Tet McMillan, Luther Burden, I'm a little bit lower on them than the consensus. They will probably go in the first round, at least Tet McMillan. Luther Burden's probably top 40 pick when it's all said and done. But then you're getting to names like Elik Ayumanor, Jack Betch, Jaden Higgins. Ayumanor is from Stanford, Betch is from TCU, Higgins is from Iowa State. And then Jalen Knoll, the slot receiver who ran in the 4.3s, is another name that makes the cut here as far as a second round grade at the wide receiver position. And we're getting all positions, and then we'll start to narrow the scope and say, hey, if all these players are graded similarly, where do your eyes tend to go and gravitate towards because you think there might be some appropriate value at a spot of need? Two tight ends, Mason Taylor, LSU. Dolphins having him in on a visit. Of course, that counts as a local visit because it's Jason Taylor's kid. And Elijah Arroyo, another local player from the University of Miami. Two really gifted tight ends with roots in South Florida in one way, shape, or form. Not early twos, but like the top of the second round bucket, just to put the numbers on it to help kind of quantify those two players in their rankings. Let's see, you have Elijah Arroyo's ranked 43rd overall on my big board, and Mason Taylor ranks 36th overall on my big board. So whether or not they end up being there, it's kind of that positional value conversation that exists, right? As far as offensive tackles, as authentic offensive tackles, Ariante Ursary from Minnesota is in this bucket. Charles Grant from William & Mary is a big-time guy that gets a big-time boost as a scheme fit. He's one of the biggest scheme fit boosts of anybody in this late 1, early 2 range. Travion Henderson gets a massive grade jump for being a good scheme fit. And then the next highest offensive player on this list is Charles Grant from William & Mary. So definitely higher than the consensus in the average rankings for Charles Grant. But that is, again, because I think the fit within the Dolphin scheme and the wide zone scheme is a really strong one. But he's can play guard, can play tackle. I think he could go either way. So I actually have him kind of splitting the difference between tackles and interior offensive linemen. Interior offensive linemen, like authentic guards and center type players, this is where the Tyler Booker conversation happens for me. If he's on the board at 48, even if he's not a scheme fit, I think there's enough assets here that I think it becomes an appropriate conversation to have versus I'm not pro Tyler Booker at 13. But if he's on the board at 48, from a pass protection standpoint, from a power standpoint, from a run game movement skills perspective, if you're willing to bend a little bit and for a player like that at this value, it might be appropriate. You can put him in there and let him dictate terms on what kind of run schemes you call. He's my top rated interior offensive lineman on players ranked 30 through 64 on my Dolphins specific draft board. But you also do have Gray Zabel and Donovan Jackson as kind of in the same relative tier as Tyler Booker. And then kind of the lower second round tier, but still would be appropriate value, pick 48 in my mind, would be Tate Ratledge and Jonah Savinaya, the guards from Georgia and Arizona, respectively. Now we need to get into the defensive side of the ball, the names that ultimately do finally land on the final Dolphins big board, and then kind of talk about, hey, this is great. We have a pool of 34 players, but what gets eliminated because you drafted it in the first round? What are the areas that you just simply can't justify unless it's a head and shoulders best player available? Versus, you've got a lot of players that are in this same sub tier. It becomes a conversation of who do you like best and who fits the scheme best uh, within those positions potentially of need to serve as the tiebreaker. It's not, unfortunately, as simple in my mind as stack it 1 through 300 and whoever's the number one player left on the board when you make your pick is the player you pick to qualify as best player available. So we're going to get the defensive side of the ball, and then we're going to kind of hierarchy needs positions and kind of set a final targets list for pick number 48 when it's all said and done. Plus the value of one more that's coming your way next year on Locked On Dolphins. So stick with us. The NBA playoffs are just about here, and FanDuel is giving new customers an incredible way to get in on all of the action on the hardwood. Right now, when you join FanDuel and place your first $5 bet, you'll get $250 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Love how FanDuel makes betting easy, whether it's picking your favorite team or diving into player props. From three-pointers to steals to assists, FanDuel has so many different ways for you to bet your favorite player props. Plus, after the game tips off, you can combine live prop bets into a same-game parlay for a chance to win big. So don't miss out. Head to FanDuel.com and claim your $250 bonus bets today. So that's the offensive side of the ball. And from just a math perspective, that's 17 players on the offensive side of the ball, which means I'm not a math guy, but I can tell you that we're going to have 17 players on the defensive side of the ball as well. The good news is the defensive tackle group is pretty crowded. There's also some decent corners that I think are going to be available in this conversation as well for the Dolphins and pick number 48. The defensive tackles for me in this bucket include Tylik Williams from Ohio State and Alfred Collins from Texas. These are predominantly run-stuffing type players. Walter Nolan from Ole Miss is also in this bucket for me. There's some people that are super high on Walter Nolan. Very disruptive type of talent, penetration style player, kind of a polarizing run defender. And there's some off the field questions that's kind of been documented throughout the pre-draft process, but nothing like super sinister. It's more of like, how do you keep his engine running hot is kind of summarizing what some of the scout and around the league questions are with Walter Nolan. I would also put Darius Alexander from Toledo in this bucket. Not the highest graded player for me. I think you'd have to have a very unique set of circumstances for me to feel like that's the best player available at number 48 overall. But he is a really fun player and has a lot of potential. He's just an older player coming from a smaller school. As far as authentic like edge pass rushers, James Pierce from Tennessee, some of the same questions with Walter Nolan exist with him. He lands in the second round bucket for me. But then Landon Jackson from Arkansas, JT Tuiwalu from Ohio State, Princely Umanmielen from Mississippi, and Ashton Gelati from Louisville. Jackson and Gelati are interesting to me because they do kind of blur the lines between they can be like an odd front end. They could play over top of the tackle. They could play tight alignment on the outside eye of the tackle. Whereas like Pierce and Umanmielen, those guys are outside guys. They're more wide nine. They're wider angles. They're not somebody you would play over top of the tackle and ask to win with length and hand power. So you have a pretty good variance. And for Miami, when you consider what their pass rush group looks like, I think they're probably more in the market for an Emmanuel Agba type of replacement. So that may forego a James Pierce in favor of a Landon Jackson at the edge position if you're trying to whittle down that list. I have two linebackers, off-ball linebackers. This not being a prominent need for the Dolphins, but has one of my favorite players overall. And you consider Tyrell Dotson's here on a 2-year deal. Jordan Brooks has 2 years left on his contract. Willie Gay's on a 1-year deal. There's not a lot of long-term KJ Britt's on a 1-year deal. There's not a lot of long-term commitments in this room. Carson Swessinger from UCLA, I think is one of the best players in this general range of the draft. He is a rock star. He has such fun tape. The challenge for Miami is you've made these other investments at off-ball linebacker, and you need the players to play reliably in front of him because he's not the biggest guy. Although he did come through the pre-draft process bigger than I think what he was expected. He was listed on the roster at UCLA in the 220s. but he ends up being the heaviest off-ball linebacker at the combine, and then does some jumps, and he jumps nearly 40 inches in the vertical, puts up good bench numbers. And he could fly, and he's a 10-game starter. That's kind of the risk and the variance there. But the tape being as good as it is for starting 10 games, you just sit there and you shake your head and you're like, wow. Like if you wanted to take an authentic best player available that might be an all-pro player someday, Carson Schwechinger's on the short list of players that grade in this stratosphere of the draft for me. And the positional value of being an off-ball linebacker maybe works in your advantage for him to potentially be there. I'm not advocating for him to be the pick, but there's a 0% chance I would be mad if he was the pick. Corners. There's 5. I have 5 in this bucket. Trey Amos from Ole Miss, Darian Porter from Iowa State, Benjamin Morrison from Notre Dame, Jacob Parrish, Kansas State, and Maxwell Hairston, Kentucky. For me, this is one of the bigger menus. Now, these guys are not all cut from the same cloth. They're athletically different. They're physically different. And that's why I think it kind of comes back to when we talked about at pick 13 with Will Johnson versus Jahdae Barron. Those are 2 very different players with very different roles to play within your defense. Like, does one of those roles mean more to you? Because it might dictate guys that are graded in the same tier. It might make it more appropriate for you to lean to a Benjamin Morrison, who I believe the Sumer Sports draft guide that came out, they have all this advanced data on all these players. It's SUMER Sports. Check it out. Benjamin Morrison, on average, was within 3 yards of the line of scrimmage on every coverage rep. He's a press guy, right? If you want to play press, this is a guy, and he's a technician. But he's coming off of a hip injury that I'm not aware of the medicals on because I'm not in an NFL team and I'm not in his camp, or I'm not his doctor. I'm not his family. So I'm not aware of where he's at. But you put the medical flag on that, and if you're watching on the YouTube channel, the guys that have kind of the yellow nameplate, it denotes that they are a player that has some kind of medical incomplete element. Then you have Jacob Parrish, who is a purple nameplate, and that indicates that it's a size question with him. He's more of an undersized player. He's under 5'10", but man, he will press the daylights out of you, and man, he'll fit the run. And he's dense. He's pushing 200. Like it's a really likable player, but they're graded in the same bucket. You just have a size conversation with a medical conversation with a guy who's maybe not as much of a scheme fit, more of a deep third zone guy and a Darian Porter, for example. And then I do have 2 safeties in this bucket as well. One of them is actually the player at number 30 on the board. And he didn't run great. He ran in the mid to low 4.5s. Xavier Watts from Notre Dame. I think if you were just going to authentically looking at the entirety of kind of the horizontal draft board for the end of the late round 1, early 2 bucket and the entirety of the round 2 bucket, Xavier Watts is going to have a very strong conversation for me to just be the best player available. But what happens if you draft Malachi Starks in the first round? And now that's an eliminated position. You're certainly not going to draft two safeties in the first 2 picks in the top 50. So while I think Watts potentially has the inroads to being the best available player if he makes it to pick 48, and I think of the names that are in the late 1, early 2 bucket, which would be Travion Henderson from Ohio State, the running back, wide receivers Tet McMillan and Luther Burden for Arizona and Missouri. And again, these are Dolphins-specific grades for the Dolphins scheme. Trey Amos and Xavier Watts. That's 5 players in the late 1, early 2 grading bucket. That's kind of a tier above. I think if any one of those players is there, you have a pretty decent chance that they should be the pick. I think Watts is the most likely to make it to you. The challenge is, what else do you like deeper in the safety room? What do you think of the guys that you have in the room? Would that potentially be a facilitator for you to move down from 48, or do you stick and pick, no questions asked, or do you choose to put a premium position weight on this where your defensive tackles are potentially an offensive lineman, like the value of that versus the need, contrasting that to a quote-unquote devalued position where you're kind of looking for a third name to tie everything together? It's not an easy conversation. But I would say if Xavier Watts is there at pick number 48, there's a pretty good chance he's going to be the best available player out of this player pool of options that we included. Now, that doesn't include a name like a Savon Revel at corner out of ECU, who I have graded higher up on the board, but has a medical flag, so he might fall into your lap. That doesn't include perhaps a Josh Connerly for the offensive tackle from Oregon, who I think some people may think is a guard, some people may think is a tackle. He played left tackle at Oregon. I think he'd be a really strong zone fit, but I have him graded higher than number 30 on the overall big board. So predicting which one of those players is there or not is kind of tough. Now, this whole big board is eventually going to be available over on Touchdown Miami on Substack. The top 100 is currently available over on Touchdown Miami. If you want to get your hands on this, you can there's a link there for you to download a PDF version of it so you could kind of see it for yourself and have it in front of yourself and kind of process reading vertically the position rankings and then horizontally how they rank amongst each other. It's a pretty cool tool. But we're going to talk about the value of one more here today on this episode of Locked On Dolphins. So stick with us. You've probably heard of Chewy, and they have everything you need to keep your pets happy and healthy. And whether shopping for food, treats, or pet healthcare, Chewy makes it fast, easy, and affordable with over 100,000 products from all of your favorite brands. Chewy has everything your pet needs, from food to treat to toys to beds to grooming. It's not just for dogs and cats, though. They have supplies for birds, fish, reptiles, and small pets, too. Chewy also makes it easy to manage your pet's health with prescriptions, telehealth, vet visits, and even in-person vet clinics rolling out nationwide. AutoShip is a game changer. You could set up automatic deliveries for food, treats, or any essentials so you never run out. You can easily change or cancel at any time. I mentioned this yesterday on the show, but we currently have 3 pets over the age of 10 in the house, 2 cats and a dog. And one of our cats was recently diagnosed with cancer. We went to the oncologist. We did the consultation. And through Chewy, we were able to kind of set up her medication. And we showed up after a couple of days after the consult, and the box was sitting on the front step, and now every other day. And it's taken a lot of the stress out of what is kind of a trying pet owner situation, right? And you don't have to worry about for treatments for something like that, driving to the vet or driving to the oncologist and the stress that puts on you and the pets. It's been a lifesaver for us. It really has. So Chewy has everything you need to keep your pets happy and healthy. Right now, you can save $20 on your first order and get free shipping by going to chewy.com or clicking the link in the description. Save $20 on your first order with free shipping by clicking on the link in the description. Minimum purchase is required. New customers only. Terms and conditions do apply. See site for complete details. For those of you who did reach out yesterday about Mittens, my wife's cat, thank you. It was great to hear from so many pet owners out there. And it's one of those ones where it does seem as though this is a quality of life extension type of effort, but they're part of your family, right? And so there's special thanks again to Chewy for kind of helping us through this process as we go. And then thankful for the draft and all of you for the distractions for something like that at home. But I want to talk about the value one more, because we did the show yesterday and it got some pushback about trading down and the prospect of it not being a good draft, and you should get a good player in a not good draft. But the value of this draft, in my mind, lies in the day 2 window. Like, we're not going to get into the 3rd round guys, but my 2nd round and 3rd round grades go from player number 36 to player number 102 on the board. So if you were picking 18th in last year's draft versus this year's draft, you're generally speaking, you're probably looking at getting a better player at pick number 18 last year versus this year. But if you're picking at pick number 55 this year, I think you're getting a better player than what you would have got at pick 55 last year. And that's just arbitrarily, and that's not using formal names and former players. So the value here being the value of one more, and the potential to add 2 players out of this tier of talent. When the conversation shifts to the Dolphins and adding more draft capital and getting a singular star player versus getting multiple starter players. And I would also say that like star players can be found at any juncture if they're the right fit of talent and person with scheme and opportunity. Chris Jones, defensive tackle, Kansas City Chiefs, not a first round pick, right? Widely considered the best defensive tackle in all of football. Max Crosby, one of the best pass rushers in all of football. He was a fourth round pick. TJ Watt, electric pass rusher. He was drafted outside the top 20. Fred Warner was a third round pick, right? You can consider Antoine Winfield Jr. as perhaps the best safety in football, and Budda Baker, another one of the contenders for the best safety in football. Mike McDaniel shouted him out with the ringer at the owners' meetings. Neither one of those guys was first round picks, right? Who's the best wide receiver in football right now? Is it Justin Jefferson? He was not drafted, I believe, in the top 20. What did he go? 21, 22, 23 overall? The best quarterbacks in the game. Josh Allen went 7. Patrick Mahomes went 10. The highest paid quarterback went in the 4th round, Dak Prescott, right? It's not where you draft, it's who you draft. And that to me is when I look at this board that I have up right here, and it's my grades on the players graded in the late 1st and early 2nd round. The opportunity, even if it means you take Derek Harmon at 20, I don't know, just arbitrarily, 21. You do a trade with, well, not Pittsburgh. We can't do Pittsburgh because they don't have 2. Seattle. Say instead of taking Malachi Starks or Jahdae Barron at 13, you can get a trade down with Seattle and you go from 13 to 18, and now you pick Nick Eamon-Ward, right? I think you're taking a lesser player. It's a difference of what, 1.5 on my overall board, but they're in the same bucket of grades, but you're taking a lesser player. The value of Eamon-Ward plus 2 players in this window of talent is a greater overall sum and result for me than Jahdae Barron and one of these players. That's the point I wanted to follow up with, because I was surprised. Somebody's like, man, seeing you want to talk about trading out 13 on makes me want to. I think he said in the YouTube comments, walk out into traffic. I said that's A, very extreme, and B, I think you've missed the point. And the point being, the appropriate move down scenarios, and we went through move down scenarios that included getting down to 34. We went through move down scenarios that included getting into the mid-20s and in the late teens, like all different variations and flavors and colors. But if you walked out of this bucket with Tyleik Williams and Alfred Collins and Donovan Jackson / Tate Ratchledge / Jonas Savinaya, and you took, instead of Jahdae Barron or Will Johnson, you took Nick Eamon-Ward in the 1st round, you mean to tell me that that's not a better combination of outcomes? I don't believe that for a minute. And in part, it's because I have a great deal of belief in the way that these grades are stacking and how they fit Miami's needs. Having a +1 could allow you to take a Carson Swessinger or a Xavier Watts potentially as an authentic best player available type scenario, and then still be able to come back and protect yourself if you like the depth of either the tackle or the guard class, to say, hey, we'll come back at that at 98, or we'll look for that at 98. Or if a player falls, we'll go up from 98 because we have a bunch of day 3 capital and we're expected to get more picks in the future. So that for me is the value, whether that's a Mason Taylor and an Elijah Arroyo as a long-term Jonnu Smith heir. If you don't want to do a contract there, maybe that's a Carson Swessinger as a best player available. Maybe that's a Xavier Watts if you go with an offensive lineman or a defensive lineman in the 1st round. Having the chance to peel back and get another name out of this group, this top 6, this 30 through 64. If you told me you get whoever you take in the 1st round and you take 2 players out of this bucket before 98, I think you've won. And, you still have to then pick the right players and the best people for the environment that you have to offer to football players to come in and be professionals and help this team win. But if you ask me a winning scenario, a winning recipe for this year's draft, find a way to get a total of 3 names in the class from player number 1 to player number 64. And if you don't find the trade down and that happens by somebody slides to 98, then I'll give you a big round of applause for having a bigger set of cojones than I would have to deal with, because I wouldn't be willing to take that bet. But that to me is the win. Is you find 3 players in here, you're going to have a pretty easy opportunity to find an overlap of conversation of best player available, mixing with need, to giving you a chance to address some spots on the roster and bring in some youth that could be really, really good scheme fits. That's going to do it for us here today on Locked On Dolphins, your team every day. Appreciate you guys, as always, for checking out the show. Make it a great rest of your day. We'll be back again tomorrow, and we hope to see you then. Go Fins.